For a decade now, the satirical news site, The Onion, has run this same headline every time there's another mass shooting. It always says, "No way to prevent this," says only nation where this regularly happens. They change the body of the article very little, placing the news story in a fictitious town each time, but always including more or less this paragraph. "This was a terrible tragedy, but sometimes these things just happen, and there's nothing anyone can do to stop them," said North Carolina resident Samuel Whipper, echoing sentiments expressed by tens of millions of individuals who reside in a nation where over half of the world's deadliest mass shootings have occurred in the past 50 years, and whose citizens are 20 times more likely to die of gun violence than any other developed nation. It's a shame, but what can we do? There really wasn't anything that was going to keep this guy from snapping and killing a lot of people if that's what he really wanted to do. Of course, maybe The Onion shouldn't make jokes about any mass shooting, just as many right-wing politicians and gun fanatics always insist in the wake of a shooting that this is no time to talk about politics. They will feign concern for the grieving families, insisting that this is not a time to debate, but a time to mourn, not to debate gun legislation or to make any changes. It is, of course, just a ruse. They know that the public's attention span is just remarkably short, unbelievably short. It was almost 12 years ago now when a lone gunman with an AR-15 went into the Sandy Hook Elementary School and killed 26 people, 20 of whom were 6- and 7-year-old children. President Obama himself thought surely now this nation will get behind serious gun reform. But even the bodies of 20 little children, literally torn apart by the battlefield force of the bullets from an AR-15, even though many of their surviving parents have tried to keep their children's memory alive, continually lobbying Congress for serious action. But folks, nothing has happened. People get distracted, they forget, they move on. And I don't say that to indict the general public. It's just a fact that if it didn't affect you personally, we have a tendency to close our minds to any further reflection. Now, the deadliest mass murder came less than 5 years after Sandy Hook, when a lone individual took an AR-15 up to a hotel room in Las Vegas, and he killed 60 people from the hotel window and wounded 400 more, randomly shooting into a crowd that was attending a country music concert. What happened as a result of that, it was symbolic, but at least after that incident, the infamous bump stock that this shooter used, a device that you put on the stock of the gun so that the mere recoil of the rifle being fired shoots the next shot, turning a semi-automatic rifle into an automatic rifle, virtually a machine gun. But this summer, in June, our out-of-control Supreme Court overturned the legislation that made the bump stock illegal. Machine guns were outlawed in the United States almost a century ago, but this Supreme Court put them back on the streets. It was just 6 years ago when a former student from the Parkland High School in Florida went into his former school and killed 16 people. And that seemed to ignite an organized protest that featured several amazingly articulate students who went on a speaking tour of the country. I tried to get one of them booked to come and speak at our church in Springfield, Missouri, But I couldn't even get the booking agent to return phone calls because these kids were in such demand. But in spite of their amazing efforts, nothing changed. Defenders of the gun industry have tried to tell us that we have these shooters because our young people play too many violent video games. But folks, kids in Japan play video games more than American kids do. But do you know how many school shootings they have in Japan? 0. None. Nada. It never happens. Like it or not, the Onion is still right. We are the only country where this regularly happens. And we know why it happens here. We lack the political will to do anything about it. Of course, school shootings are just a small fraction of the gun murders in the United States every year, but they are among the most noticeable. Just over 300 students were killed in schools around the world last year, but 288 of those were in the USA. 288 in the United States, 8 in Mexico, 6 in South Africa, 5 in India, 4 in Pakistan and Nigeria, 3 in Afghanistan, 2 each in Brazil, France, and Canada, and only 1 in China and 1 in Russia, 1 in Turkey, Germany, Kenya, Greece, Azerbaijan, Hungary, and Estonia. None in most of the rest of the world. We lost 288 students, which is unimaginable and indefensible considering the fact that the rest of the world only had 12. None in most of the rest of the world. Isn't it fair to say that gun laws in the United States are insane and indefensible? Of course, the death toll is the worst part, but beyond the dead and wounded, there is to be considered how every single school child in the country is traumatized by constantly having to go through these active shooter exercises. Bulletproof backpacks are now a thing that parents will buy for their kids in hope that their kids will get home from school alive. Schools, which are always strapped for resources, are now having to spend precious dollars hiring security guards, putting up metal detectors, hardening the doors, and having additional staff to manage IDs and letting people in and out. And what's more, schools and police departments are now always on edge, and our schools are awash in cell phones, so that any student who wants to create some excitement or get their school closed down for the day may only have to make a phone call. Late last month, April Rubin reported in Axios that in a single afternoon, schools in Tennessee, South Carolina, Minnesota, Ohio, Florida, Pennsylvania, Arkansas, Texas, Michigan, and Maryland all received fake threats. In Volusia County, Florida, the sheriff's office received 54 tips about potential threats in a single night. And all the threats turned out to be false, but they all had to be investigated. In Springfield, Ohio, schools closed over a hoax bomb threat following the GOP presidential ticket's amplification of a completely debunked conspiracy theory that immigrants were eating the city residents' pets. The threat of gun violence is real. We have nearly 300 dead students every year to prove it, but then schools across the country are regularly disrupted by fake reports that, regardless of the fact that they're fake, have to be taken seriously, have to use up police time to investigate it. Is it any wonder then that so many of our schools have become so ineffective in performing their primary mission, which is to educate our children? Law enforcement officials across Florida have started to arrest students who call in threats, and they have this perp walk with a handcuffed preteen student and their parents, hoping that public humiliation will help to curb this dangerous trend. School has just started here in Florida, and they've already arrested dozens of kids between the ages of 11 and 15. One 11-year-old turned out to actually have collected a small arsenal of guns and swords in his room, stockpiled for the day that he actually would attack his school. Nothing can be done, says the only nation where this regularly happens. We used to hear the NRA claiming that gun laws don't work, except for the fact that they do work in every other nation of the world. They point at the murder rates in Chicago and New York, where there are strict gun laws, and they point at those two cities as their proof that gun laws don't work, when obviously a city law doesn't keep anyone from just outside the city from bringing in guns. I've pointed out before that Mexico only has one legal gun store in the whole country, and they only serve members of Mexico's police forces. But there are more than 6,000 gun shops in the United States arrayed all along the border with Mexico, so that our gun shops are literally what is arming the drug cartels in their civil war in Mexico. You know, a lot of the undocumented immigrants who come to the United States are coming here because it's too dangerous to live in Mexico. But come on, why is it so dangerous to live in Mexico? Because of the guns that are legally sold in the United States and taken to Mexico by gangs. Where there are a lot of guns, there are a lot of shootings. That's how it works. The NRA has said for years that guns don't kill people, that people kill people. But the truth of it is that people with guns kill people, particularly people with assault rifles and handguns, both of which are made solely for the purpose of shooting people. You don't hunt deer with a pistol. You don't shoot pheasant with an AR-15. If you need to defend your home, and I recognize that some people do, they can do that with a shotgun, which works very well at short range without being very good at shooting a gun. If you need to shoot a duck, you get a single shot rifle. You don't need to shoot a duck 4 or 5 times. That bird's probably too tough to eat anyway if you have to keep shooting it. I have no idea how many credible assassination threats are being made against presidents, presidential candidates, politicians, and celebrities. The Secret Service doesn't give out that information for good reason. We only hear about it when shots are fired or a gunman is apprehended. Naturally, when Donald Trump was wounded in an assassination attempt, Trump allies tried to blame Kamala Harris and those of us who have been warning for years that Trump is a very real danger to our democracy. But the blame rests squarely on the shoulders of the Republicans, who've made it absolutely certain that almost anyone with enough money can buy a battlefield-styled assault rifle, whether they're in their late teens, whether they have obvious dangers about their mental health or their circumstances of life. The ability to buy a gun is almost unhindered, and even those who cannot legally go into a gun store and buy one can go to any number of trade shows or swap meets and buy them without any documentation. I don't think that the USA has a much larger population of crazy people compared to other countries. Probably the United States has an average number of crazy people. It's just that this nation of some 320 million people has over 400 million guns. So that crazy people, kids, angry people, lonely teenagers who are bored and need attention can get their hands on lethal weapons and thousands upon thousands of rounds of ammunition. And in that context, it is actually a wonder that we don't have more people being killed every year than we do. Look, people, the Second Amendment was written when the arms they referenced were highly inaccurate, single-shot muskets that took several seconds to reload. There is no rational argument that the authors of the Constitution could have imagined assault rifles with 100-round capacity. It should also be noted that the Second Amendment was added to the Bill of Rights as a concession to slave owners who were frequently dramatically outnumbered by their slaves and in constant fear of a very reasonable and rational revolt. This was a very real fear of George Washington's. I know it will get some people all twisted up like a pretzel to hear me say it, but the Second Amendment is in sore need of being amended. Jesus didn't write the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment was written by and for paranoid slave owners. Our children, our grandchildren, should not be traumatized every school year with active shooter drills and seeing armed police officers storming the building just because someone called in a fake threat. Every other developed nation in the world has found a way for people to own the arms they actually need and to store their hobby guns at shooting ranges so that our kids can feel safe when they go to school without having to wear a bulletproof vest on the school bus. The NRA thankfully does not have the political clout they once had, and they no longer have the financial resources to buy politicians that they used to have. But still, we have a shortage of courage among our legislators. But here's the good news. The majority of Americans favor sensible gun laws. And so if we just stop voting for politicians who don't give us sensible gun laws, then we will have sensible gun laws, much like the rest of the world has, and we would have them within a single election cycle. It's just that easy. If only people would begin to vote in favor of their children living long enough to graduate rather than being murdered. The only reason that the most common cause of death among children in our country is being shot is because of the indifference of voters who will not vote for change. And I hope that you are not one of the voters that will not vote for change, because change is overdue.
Thank you for watching our videos. We are entirely dependent on the donations of our listeners and members. We hope that you find this content to be important enough to help us to keep offering these videos to the public at no charge by becoming a regular contributor. Please click on the donate button on our website at www.spfccc.org. Thank you for your support of progressive religious programming.